This is the last talk in this current series, if you can believe it. I know. So for the last 3 months, we've been looking at this theme, building on emptiness. And this evening, I'm giving the last talk in this series called Getting Out of the Way. And the meaning of that will become obvious in a little while. So with building on emptiness, we've been looking at how we can become bricks in this building of the Buddha land, so a land where we and all other beings can have easy access to enlightenment, and things will be very easy for us to gain awareness and liberation. And it all sounds very lovely in the Buddha land, and that's what we're building. We've been looking at how we can make ourselves into the sort of person who can help to build this Buddha land. And we've been framing it in emptiness, so emptiness meaning the lack of any fixed and essential nature of ourselves. So we've got this infinite potential, and that's what allows us to become these bricks that build the Buddha land. So that's what we've been looking at for the last 3 months. And we've been using a set of one of the great lists, as we all love the lists, don't we? One of the lists to help guide us through this process of looking at how we can build this Buddha land. So let's have a look at that list we've been working our way through. And this list has got lots of different names. The stages, the spiritual path of the Dharma life, or we could call them just the 5 great stages. And they're the stages of integration, of positive emotion, of spiritual death, and spiritual rebirth, and lastly, receptivity. So we've had lots of talks about these first 4. So I'll sort of give you a sense of what they are, but if you want to know about any more of them specifically in depth, you can go backwards and look at the talks given earlier on in this series. But this evening, I'm going to focus mainly on this 5th one that we haven't looked too much at yet, which is receptivity, or sometimes called spiritual receptivity. So you might think, it's stuck at the end of this list, so you might think it's the least important. Or you might think that it's something that you can only do once you've done all the other ones. You get to the end, you've died, you've been reborn, and then you can be receptive. Which is sort of true, but actually that's not quite how it is. Actually, we need receptivity at every single stage of the spiritual path, throughout our Dharma lives, right from the word go. It's really, really important. And actually, having it at the end of the list doesn't really give much of a sense of the importance of receptivity. So instead of a list, I've drawn a picture. Art isn't my special subject, so it's a flower. Just in case you can't tell. So in the centre of the flower, we've got receptivity. So it's a bit like receptivity is the heart of the flower, the heart of the spiritual life, where the real scent and the beauty is living in the receptivity. And then the scent of receptivity permeates out into integration, into positive emotion, into spiritual death, and into spiritual rebirth. So the scent of receptivity flavours and perfumes and permeates all the other stages of our spiritual life. So in this talk, I'm going to look a little bit, explore how this scent of receptivity does actually permeate and radiate those different aspects of our spiritual life. But first I'm going to say a little bit about what spiritual receptivity is in general, just in case you've not come across the term before. So often when we talk about our Dharma lives and our practice, we often stress the effort we need to make, don't we? For example, as soon as we come on the intro course, we're starting to look at habits that we want to change, qualities we want to develop, and that's not just the intro course. We're doing that all the way through our Dharma lives, aren't we? We're examining our lives, looking at what we want to change and transform, and then we apply effort in order to make those transformations. And one of the most memorable examples of this for me is when I'd, in the first manifestation of our community about 9 years ago, and I used to have this habit of speaking very harshly about myself. And one day Mokshitara said, I think we should have a swear box for you. So we set up a little kind of swear box in the community, and every time I said anything harsh about myself, and somebody noticed, I had to put £1 in the swear box. And I tell you, I kicked that habit quite quickly. It's nothing like, it was £1 a go, it's quite expensive, so it didn't take very long, but it was quite a lot of effort. I had to put the conditions in place, I had to get the box, I had to get my friends involved, I had to use my money, so there was lots of effort involved. But through using that effort, I did change that habit, and through that I became a much more positive person. So karmic, that sort of effort I'm making is karmic effort in the realm of karma. And that sort of effort is absolutely essential in our Dharma lives. We can't get very far, we can't really get anywhere without that sort of effort at some point in our Dharma lives. Completely indispensable. So we apply our will, don't we? Karma is the realm of our volition and our will. And we use our volition and our will to apply that to make the changes that we want to see in our lives. But willed effort alone won't carry us through our Dharma lives. Willed effort alone isn't enough. And sometimes we need to let go of that willed effort. We need to leave space. We need to get out of the way. There's the title. We get out of the way and so something else can emerge. If we just pushing all the time, there's no space for anything to happen. So in other words, we need this quality of receptivity to flavour and perfume our spiritual lives. And there's other words that we can use for receptivity, if you don't like that one. You can think of it as an opening out. You can think of it as a responsiveness. So Subhuti, if you've heard of Subhuti, he's very keen on this term responsiveness, becoming a responsive person. There's also the language of sensitivity and becoming more sensitive. And you could also think about learning to vibrate with what's going on. So that's another term. My personal favourite is the analogy of listening. And maybe it's because I'm very into music, I'm a musician, and listening for me is a very good analogy for what's required in the quality of receptivity. Because we all know, don't we, what it's like to really sort of fully listen to something. So it might be a sound that we love, like the bird's song or the wind in the trees, or it might be some music that we love, or even a person speaking. So we have lots of examples, lots of times when we're needing to listen. So there's a balance, isn't there, in what we need to do when we're listening. So we're not straining, we're not trying to pull the sound towards us and grasp after it if we're just listening. We're letting the sound come to us. And I know that for myself sometimes I do try and over-listen and I strain, and it sort of sucks all the joy out of what I'm listening to, actually. So receptivity isn't effortful. There's no kind of straining and effort in receptivity, in listening. But at the same time, we can't be completely passive in the sense of being disengaged, because I'm sure we also have all had experience of somebody talking to us and us just having not heard a word they've said because our mind's been somewhere else, or listening, you've got an album on maybe while you're driving or in the background, and it gets to the end and you haven't actually heard any of the songs on the album or any of that piece of music really, because your mind's been somewhere else. So I think of the quality as receptivity, as a real, true listening and hearing to what's going on. So what's going on both within us and also without us. So hopefully that gives a little flavour of receptivity. So now let's move on to looking at how that might manifest in these great stages. And to help us to get this sense of the flavour, I've come up with the same list but in slightly different words. So we might give us a bit of a kind of more poetic, if you like. So the first one, number one, is to do with integration, coming together. And I've called this stage of listening to all of ourselves. Listening to all of ourselves. So you might remember way back at the beginning of this series, we had a number of talks about different aspects of integration. And so integration is the term that we use to describe what happens when all of ourselves is behind what we're doing. So it's a bit like all of ourselves are bits of us, we're all in union, we're all in harmony, to continue the musical analogy. We're all in harmony, all the bits of us, and all in accord. So all of our energy is flowing in one direction. So we had lots and lots of talks about this at the beginning of this series. And Bodhinaga in particular explored how this means that we're not derailed by inner conflicts. It means we have a lot of energy and freedom and ease because we're all just flowing in one direction. And it also means we can be quite strong because we're quite clear about our ideals. We can stand outside the group. We're not pulled around by what people want from us. We can stand true to what we really and truly believe. So this is the quality of integration. So what does receptivity have to do with integration then? So when he talks about becoming an individual, becoming a free individual, I think was the talk, Bodhinaga introduced us to this image given to us by a teacher called Vasantra of of a person like us, any one of us, actually containing 100 different selves, 100 different selves. And all those different selves, they don't all want the same thing. So that's what we're like. We are like, there's 100 different selves in us, all wanting different things, all having different ideas about how to run the show of our life. And just to extend the analogy, here's another thing that I've heard from somebody. It might also be the Santra, I'm not sure. But it's as if all these 100 selves are all trying to run a marathon together. And you can see from where they are in the marathon and their attitude to the marathon, what they're thinking about what they're trying to do. So you've got like the bit that's right at the front, who's like, you know, with the energy drinks and the cheerleading squad and like really fit and strong. So you've got that bit right at the front. Yes, this is brilliant. And then you've got the kind of sort of people plodding along in the middle, and then you've got the stragglers right at the end who really just want to go home and put their feet up with a pizza. They're really not into this running at all. And they're thinking, what is going on with that guy at the front with the energy drink? So that is kind of what we're like. And we're a bit like that in relation to our Dharma lives as well. So there's all these different selves in relation to us and our relationship with the Dharma and our spiritual practice. So some of ourselves, maybe the bits of us that are in charge this evening that brought you here to the Great Hall to hear this talk, those are the bits of us, ourselves, that really want to engage in the Dharma life, really want to practice meditation, really want to learn about Buddhism, really want to grow, they want to change, they want to make friends in the Sangha. You know, they're really on board, those bits of us. And there's probably a few of those bits of these selves inside of us. But not all of ourselves are that interested in that sort of thing. If you're anything like me anyway, there's definitely some selves that are a little bit not sure about that. And some selves don't really want that. So some selves would much rather be watching Netflix than listening to a talk or preparing for Mitra study. Or they'd much rather, those selves, have a lovely lie-in rather than get up and meditate in the morning before they go to work. Or they'd much rather make a slightly cutting remark to somebody when they're annoyed by them, rather than just trying to practice patience and metta, which is so boring, isn't it? Or trying to always tell the truth and not exaggerate and make our lives more interesting. So all those bits of us that are just not on with all the holy religious stuff. They just want to, go and have fun somewhere else. And it might be that these bits of ourselves, they're not always very evident. They might be in hiding. But they're definitely there, aren't they? Because all of a sudden, we find ourselves doing those things, or saying those things, or thinking those things. And so those bits of us are suddenly in charge. And the bits of us that are into the Dharma, well, where are they? They're missing in action. So the problem is, though, that the bits of us that are into the Dharma can't just go sprinting ahead and leave all the other bits behind. All of the selves need to cross the finish line together, or none of them can. And you could say that the race is run as quickly as the slowest runner. So the Dharma life is a life of total transformation. And if there are bits of us that we're leaving out, well, we're going to know about it sooner or later. So, and I want to tell you a little story. A few years ago, I was living at Adhisthana on the Dharma Life course there for young women. And I was part of a writing workshop. And the order member, she asked us to do an exercise where we try to imagine all of our different selves and give them all names. So it was really fun, know it all and show off. And anyway, so I named lots, and then she said, and then I'd like two of them to have a conversation, and you can write the conversation down. So I had a conversation between the one that was at the front of my marathon, which I called the spiritual superhero, and the one who was right at the back, which I called the worm. So my spiritual superhero and my worm had a conversation. So my spiritual superhero was the bit of me that was really into the Dharma, wasn't into anything else, didn't care about anything else. Everything else was just totally meaningless, and just wanted to do lots of striving and all of that. So that was the bit of me that was a spiritual superhero. And the worm, it's just all too hard. I'm never going to change. I'm still doing the same things I've been doing for the last 7 years. It's all pointless. I'm getting all really despondent and depressed. So that was the worm. So there were quite contrasting strands of my personality, which often would be in conflict, and often you'd see like me having phases of the spiritual superhero being in charge, and then phases of the worm being in charge. I was in that way quite unintegrated. And I was definitely more of a fan of the spiritual superhero. I thought the spiritual superhero was right, and had the right idea, and the worm was just a whiny waste of space that needed to be completely deleted from my personality because it was just stopping me from, world domination or something. So that's what I thought. But anyway, so I sat down to start doing this writing exercise, and it was really, really interesting because quite quickly what I discovered was that wasn't it at all. So actually, I started to hear all of these parts of the worm that I hadn't been aware of. This fear of letting people down, fear of not being good enough, a fear of, moving away from comfortable ways of being that I've been my whole life, and into, the fear of moving into being a completely new way that I didn't know about, which are completely understandable fears. And my response to that part of myself had been, to bully it really, push it away, ignore it, egged on by my really kind of bullying spiritual superhero. So it turned out that my kind of ideal spiritual superhero is actually a bit of a bully. So it was quite interesting. So once I started to listen really more fully to both of those sides of myself, I was able then to have a much more appropriate response, which was to have a lot more metta and patience towards myself. And what I noticed was that my spiritual superhero became less of a bully, and my worm became a lot less whiny, and I became a lot more positive and integrated because I'd learned to listen to all of the bits of myself, and so they'd come more into harmony. So hopefully that will make some sense to you. I did want to tell you that story because it's probably my most profound experience of integration happening for me. Yeah. So I called this, this is why I called this section listening to all of ourselves, because I think receptivity in relation to integration means having an openness and awareness of all the different parts of ourselves. Because then what happens is we can hear what's needed, and then we can respond appropriately. So then our activity is perfumed by what we've received, by what we've seen. So there's actually this lovely flow of activity and receptivity in the spiritual life. It's not that we're active, and then we stop being active, and then we're receptive, and then we're receptive for a bit, and then we're active again. It's much more kind of fluid than that. So I started to listen to the parts of myself, and instantly I was able to respond with metta and understanding. And then that instantly led to much more receptivity. So there was this lovely flow of activity and receptivity. And we can particularly see this flow happening in meditation, I think. So, for example, in the mindfulness of breathing, which is the meditation traditionally associated with this stage, this integration stage. So, if we try and sit down to do the mindfulness of breathing without any awareness of ourselves, without any awareness of how we actually are, if we just get on our cushion and we immediately start going 1, 2, 3, 4, and we've probably all done it, haven't we? Completely unreceptive to how we actually are. Well, we're not going to get very concentrated. And if we do that over a long period of time, we're probably going to develop quite a high level of resistance to meditation, which is certainly what happened to me anyway. But if what we do instead is if we sit down, we do a bit of a body scan, we notice how we are, we notice any tension in our body, we notice our emotional state, and we respond appropriately with curiosity and kindness to those things, well, we're going to get much more engaged with our practice, and we're going to make a lot more progress that way. I mean, it'll certainly be more enjoyable, if nothing else. So, I just want to share as well one more image of integration in this kind of receptivity in relation to integration, which I really love, which an order member called Paramananda once said to me when I went to ask him about my meditation. And he said, well, we sometimes have this image of integration and the process of integration being like this, a narrowing. And he said, it's not like that. Integration is like this. It's a broadening. And I just thought that was so helpful. Integration isn't about learning to cut parts of ourselves out so we've only got the kind of convenient bits left. Actually, it's learning to become much bigger, like a big, big bowl that can hold absolutely all the different parts of ourselves. And respond appropriately to all of the different parts, whatever is going on. And of course, it's not important to only be receptive to the stragglers, to the worms in our experience. We also have to be receptive to the ones that are up front as well, the ones that are really inspired. Because a lot of ourselves, they're not going to be that into it, are they? A lot of ourselves, they're crying out for us to kind of engage in mundane activity. I know certainly a lot of my inner selves are. And I sometimes notice that for myself, those voices, the ones at the back, they're shouting the loudest, actually. They're really, really quite mouthy. The call of the mundane is so strong, both within us and also it's being blasted at us from pretty much everywhere that we look outside in society. So we need to learn to listen out for the voices that are pulling us onwards. And we might find that we have to listen quite carefully, because sometimes those voices, they're like a beautiful little whispering of an angel. Very, very quiet and refined. We can't always hear them over the noise of our lives. So we do have to listen quite carefully to allow ourselves to hear them and to be guided on by those voices. So to do this, it's really helpful to make sure that we notice when we do hear those voices, and we put ourselves in conditions where it's possible for us to hear those voices. Because if not, we just won't hear them. We'll just be taken over by all the noise, the white noise. So we can notice we might hear these best parts of ourselves, maybe when we're here at the centre, or when we're with spiritual friends. It might be when we're doing puja. So we're going to do puja next week. So that's a really good opportunity to try and listen out for those sort of higher voices within ourselves. It might be when you're singing mantras in beautiful harmony, and if so, then you might like to come and join the choir that's starting next Friday, which I will be leading. Shameless plug over. So whatever it is for us, whatever kind of draws that out of us, it's really important to know what it is and to make sure we're doing that, so that we can learn to live more and more from those parts of ourselves, at the same time as starting to hear all the bits of us that have got slightly different ideas about things. So that's the first stage, listening to all of ourselves. So then let's move on to positive emotions, which I've called listening to the heart's call. So positive emotion, just to remind us all, isn't just emotion that feels nice. So this is not just about seeking pleasant emotion. It's about emotion that's positive in the dharmic sense. So it's emotion that leads us towards an opening of the heart, a movement towards an awakening or towards liberation, towards connection. So Vedanya talked about this in his talk a number of weeks ago. He mentioned what the called, you'll remember, the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 heavenly abodes. So we've got metta, which we'll all remember. There's also karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy. We've got upekkha, equanimity. And there's all sorts of other ones as well, like shraddha, or faith, and gratitude, kri, which is positive shame, reverence. So there's all these positive emotions that we can cultivate in the spiritual life. So what does receptivity look like when in this realm of positive emotion? So as you probably can work out, or you might just already know, metta is the most fundamental positive emotion. So you could say that metta is the basic attitude of the heart from which all of the other positive emotions spring. And of course we've already got a really obvious tool for helping us to work with metta, which is the metta bhavana meditation. So I'm going to say a little bit about this and what receptivity might look like in this meditation, because bhavana, as you'll remember, means cultivation of or development of. And well, doesn't that just sound a little bit active and effortful, actually? Bhavana, so what does receptivity have to do with this? Well, to work effectively in the metta bhavana, we do need quite a lot of receptivity, and you've probably been applying this quite naturally, but I'll just kind of elucidate this. So because to begin with, of course, we bring the person to mind. We use quite a lot of effort sometimes, don't we? So sometimes it might seem quite effortless to bring somebody to mind, but sometimes we really have to work, don't we? Especially if there's somebody that we really don't want to bring to mind, or somebody that we're not really very interested in bringing to mind, we don't really care about them. We might have to make a lot of effort to imagine what's going on for them, where they might be, really make a connection with them in our minds. It can be quite effortful. And then, once we've done that, well, what's the next thing we do? We might drop the phrases in. So again, we've got some activity going on. But then I'd suggest that at this stage, receptivity becomes very, very important, because what we need to do then is we need to kind of sit back and we need to notice the effect of what we've been doing. We need to then connect with the effect that that practice is having on us. You know, may they be well. Well, what do we want them to be well? What's going on in us? So has anything changed in us? Has our heart opened a little bit towards them? Have we dropped any kind of grumbly thoughts that we might have been having about them? Have we softened at all? So we need to kind of observe what's going on in our bodies and in our minds. And we can't do that if we're still kind of pushing. We need to, at that point, have some receptivity, some listening to the effects of the effort we've made, so that then we can adapt what we then do next in the practice. Because if we do notice that that's had that positive effect, well, then all we need to do is just put our attention there, and that will grow. So it happens very naturally. But if we notice that it hasn't had that effect, then we might need to apply a bit more effort. So we might need to bring them to mind even more fully, or try and imagine, somebody who loves them and what they might think, for example. So there's, again, this play between activity and receptivity, applying some effort, sitting back, listening to the effect, and then moving back in to respond appropriately. And it can be quite subtle, and we'll all be experiencing that in different ways as well. And of course, we don't just develop metta on the cushion, do we? And we're hopefully trying to develop metta all of the rest of the time as well, when we're confronted with actual people in front of us. The rest of the time, and in this case, receptivity is just as important. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that sometimes when I'm confronted with a person and they share something about themselves or their life with me, I'm just not that moved. It's like I'm not quite plugged in to them. I'm not really hearing them. I'm not really hearing them. I'm kind of hearing the words, but I'm not really taking in what they've said. So I'm not really feeling with them. So there's an absence of metta there in my response, because there's not enough receptivity. I'm not receptive to the person as a whole. So I've forgotten to plug into them. But when I do plug in, it's almost like there's an electric current. It's almost like I've plugged into something and I become alive and I start to vibrate with them. And that's when there's a receptivity. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because from the other side, you always know when that's happening as well, don't you? When somebody's really taking you in. We've got this phrase, taking somebody in. And that, I think, is really resonant of the need for receptivity and listening in this empathetic aspect of metta. And I've got a friend, Moksha-lila, you might know, and she's particularly excellent at this. Like, often when I'm with Moksha-lila, I always feel completely like she's tuned into me, like she's really listening out for what's going on with me. And then I feel really alive when that's happening. So that's a real gift that she gives to me, really listening to me. So I think that's something we can really do for each other, is to really kind of try and tune into each other, really listen out for what's going on with each other. And interestingly, one of the words that's often translated as compassion from the scriptures is anukampa. And anukampa literally means trembling with or vibrating with. So I think that's really, again, emphasises the need to really kind of feel for and with another person when we're trying to relate to them with positive emotion. And before I move on from positive emotion, having talked about metta, I do just want to mention one other positive emotion, which is the emotion of free or positive shame. And I remember Daniel mentioned this briefly in his talk, but didn't really go into it. So I'd like to just say a little bit about it, because I think it's very, very interesting, particularly in relation to receptivity. So I think it's really important not to confuse free with shame as it's used in a more psychological way. So in the sense that there's something like wrong with us, essentially, and where it is quite a negative term. It doesn't mean that in Buddhism. So in Buddhism, shame means free is when we kind of perceive, we register that our behaviour has fallen short of the ideals that we set for ourselves. And we have that twinge, don't we? We have, ooh. It's kind of really physical, really visceral. And it's the twinge we feel when we realise we've done something unkind, when we've hurt somebody, when we've told a lie, when we've hurt somebody through lack of mindfulness, when we've said something harsh has just fallen out of our mouths, we just think, ooh. So that is free, that's the arising of free. And until we're enlightened, of course, we're going to be doing these sorts of things many times a day, so we'll have lots of opportunity to experience free. So that's very good, isn't it? And so obviously huri is an example of a positive emotion which isn't pleasant particularly, doesn't feel very pleasant. And you could say that if we're experiencing free, if we're getting those twinges, we're already quite receptive actually, because we've got an ethical sensitivity, and when that happens, it's like the highest parts of ourselves are calling out. They go, no, you can do better. So that's very, very that is very receptive of us already. So if that's happening, we're doing very well. And actually, what we might find, what we're almost certainly going to find as we progress along the path, is that this happens more and more and more. And this is good, because it's a sign that we're getting more and more ethically sensitive. Although, unfortunately, it can feel like we're just getting more and more unskillful. But that's not it. Actually, we're getting better, but actually we're also becoming more ethically sensitive. So we feel more and more shame. So the reason I wanted to mention this as well is because I think that sometimes I've noticed that within myself, and I think I observe in others, that our response to free isn't always that useful. So what happens is we do something, and then we register what we've done. We have that little twinge of free, which is quite painful, isn't it? And then what we can do, if we're not careful, is we just sort of push it aside. Think, oh, that wasn't very good, oh well. And then it's gone, we don't have to think about it again. And I noticed that recently. I talk a lot, and I said something, and it was a little bit harsh, and I noticed that it might have upset somebody, and I just registered that. I felt a bit free, and then I thought, oh well, it's happened now, I won't do anything about it. And the next time I saw them, I just felt a bit sheepish, and I was just extra nice to them, which was probably quite confusing for that person. So, and I've noticed other people do that as well, I think. Because what I notice is in myself, when I do that, if I make a habit of that, then I sort of develop this sense of myself as a sort of vague sense of being a bad person or a bad Buddhist. And I hear other people talking about being bad Buddhists, which is a term we should eradicate from our lexicon, bad Buddhists. And this kind of quite a vagueness and inclarity about my ethical behaviour in general, actually. Because actually, when we experience free, it's such an opportunity. It's such an opportunity. So, like, when I had that moment of that harsh speech and I noticed free, what I could have done is I could have had some curiosity. If I'd have stayed with it, I could have thought, that's really interesting. Like, why did I do that? Like, what were the conditions that led to that arising? Is this a habit in me? Do I do this a lot? Is there something I could do about this to transform this habit? And is there something I need to check out with the other person? Maybe I could go and talk to them and check that out, and maybe I could deepen our connection in that way. So all this opportunity that I could have had if I'd have stuck with my huri, but instead I chose to push it to one side and ended up feeling a bit kind of shifty. So I suppose it's a kind of what I'm suggesting is that if we're receptive enough to feel the huri in the first place, we could make an attempt to try and stick with the huri. Rather than pushing it away because it's unpleasant, because then it might really help us to engage and transform some of our habits, some of our most painful habits actually. So that's the second of the stages. So the third stage, the stage of spiritual death, I've called listening to our limitations. I'm just going to have a little drink. Listening to our limitations. So spiritual death. So it's kind of quite an ominous term, spiritual death. So spiritual death is what happened when that lovely, integrated and positive being that we've created and we've cultivated has to break open because it's too limited. It's become too limited. Something bigger and more integrated and positive needs to come into its place, needs to take its place. And spiritual death isn't just something that happens once. I think sometimes it can be a bit confusing because we see it third on the list and we think, oh, okay, so we go along and then we have a spiritual death and then we're reborn and then that's sort of the end. But actually spiritual death It happens over and over again. Every time we come into contact with something that breaks open our ideas about who we are, about what the world's like, we're having another spiritual death. And it can happen in quite big ways or in quite small ways. And I called it listening to our limitations, because this is what spiritual death feels like to me. It's like when who I am now, it hits a ceiling. It hits a ceiling of limitation where I can't go any further from who I am. I need to almost become a different person in order to get any further. So something has to drop away. And I was thinking, what does receptivity have to do with spiritual death? What's the perfume of receptivity at this stage? And I was thinking very important in this stage would be a receptivity to reality, which might sound a bit grand, when we're talking about spiritual death. And I was thinking about the image of the Buddha land. So we've been talking a lot about the Buddha land because it's sort of involved in the title of the thing. So about building this land where, and traditionally the Buddha lands, they're filled with birds that sing about impermanence, and they're filled with rivers that sing about dukkha, and they're filled with wind that tells us about interconnectedness and lack of self-nature. So everything in the world is trying to communicate reality to us in these Buddha lands traditionally. And I was thinking, we live in that Buddha land, so everything actually around us is trying to communicate that to us, but we just don't hear it. And if we really were receptive and we really listened to the meaning behind what goes on around us, then we'd be doing very well. We'd probably have some of these spiritual deaths. So, for example, if we saw the changing of the seasons, for what it is, we see the leaves, it's very, very hot at the moment. And then at some point the nights are going to start drawing in, and all the beautiful flowers are all going to start wilting. I mean, they're dying, so we want them because of no rain. But, we notice all these changes in the natural world. And we remember impermanence, we have an insight into impermanence, or we know we get grey hairs, and we think, oh, impermanence. So everything's trying to tell us about impermanence, we just don't listen to it. Or, the pain we experience when we think something's going to bring us, like, supreme happiness, and then it doesn't. And then we think, oh, well, let me go off to the next thing. But if we really listened to that pain, it's telling us that we can't get happiness from things outside of ourselves. Wow, it's like reality. So, if we really listened to the meaning of that event, or, if we really listened to the pain we experience when we try and behave selfishly as if we're the most important thing and we're not interconnected at all, and how painful that is actually, and how much suffering that brings us. Or when we go and look at the night sky and we see how small we are. If we really did that, then we would really understand, we'd really have an insight into the lack of self-nature. So it's all there really for us, and we just need to be receptive. And when we are receptive to that, and that's when spiritual death occurs, because something which is old has to drop away so we can see it with new eyes. We become a new being who sees the world with new eyes, more in its flux and flow, how it really is. I was thinking of ways to try and cultivate this sort of receptivity, and I came back to the old chestnut of doing nothing, which I find very unattractive in the practice, but it's very, very good, because we don't do it very much, do we, doing nothing. In fact, I was thinking a more attainable goal might be saying a practice of doing just one thing at a time, because often we're doing at least 2 or 3 things at a time, aren't we? We're trying to eat our dinner, check our phone, listen to the news, talk to somebody. We rarely do even one thing at a time, never mind nothing. So we could even try just doing one thing at a time. And we could try maybe just sitting on a chair and looking out the window, or just outside at a cloud or at a tree, or with no particular design at all on the tree or the cloud, no particular need to get anything from that, and just kind of relax and see what happens. And we might be quite interested at what happens. Something quite interesting might arise from that. And I can find for myself that and not even drinking a cup of tea, because sometimes people say, can I drink a tea? And look at that thing, I'm like, no, just looking at the thing, that's the only thing. Because then, in that space, something else can arise, and I've noticed that for myself, that in those spaces, I can find myself having all sorts of little insights about things that never would have arisen before, because I wouldn't have seen or heard anything really, because I was too busy putting other input into my body. So again, I think there's this flow between activity and receptivity, but it's more subtle here in the area of thoughts. if we can open a space of more free from thinking, then some new sorts of thoughts can come in which can steer our consciousness and bring about spiritual death. And I was also reflecting on the importance of receptivity to wisdom in relation to spiritual death. And in particular, wisdom as manifested by other people. You know, there's lots of very wise people in this room who've been practicing the Dharma a lot longer than me, are a lot wiser than me, and have probably a much clearer perspective about the way things really are, and probably about me as well, actually. They can probably see things about me that I can't see, both good and bad, I imagine. And there's lots of those people around us. So I was thinking about how useful it would be if we could become more receptive to the wisdom of people around us, and how much in a good stead that would stand us. Both what they say and also just kind of being attuned to the example. You know, when people are just moving around, sometimes you really get a sense that they've got something just by the way they stand or by the way they kind of take things in. And of course this requires a receptivity to the fact that we might be wrong and that there are people who might know more than us. And this sort of humility is a wisdom in itself, actually. And there's a great story about this, which I'll tell quickly, which is apparently it's quite a famous story in the Zen tradition. And one day there was this professor, very, very self-important, very wise, very clever man, and he decided he was going to go and see this Zen master to get some wisdom teachings. So he went to see this Zen master and he sat down, and the Zen master welcomed him, and then he started to pour them some tea. And then he started to pour, and then he just kept pouring, and he kept pouring, and he kept pouring, and the tea was going. He filled the cup, and then it went over the side of the cup, and then it was going all over the table, and it started dribbling onto the floor. And eventually the professor said, What are you doing? Can't you see that the cup is completely full, and the tea is gone everywhere? And the Zen master said, well, yes, but you're just like this cup. Actually, you're just like this cup. You're so full up with your own opinions and your views, you can't receive any wisdom. Go away and come back when you're empty. So we need to be like that. We need to go away and come back when we're empty. We need to be empty enough, at least, to be able to receive the wisdom that's around us, the feedback that we might get, the advice, the sort of nudging us in the direction of this retreat or that event. It's all really good stuff, and if we can open out to it, we'll get along much better, I think. So that's spiritual death, and finally, moving on to spiritual rebirth, which are called listening to the call of the beyond. And in a way you could say that in this, we're moving into the realm of spiritual receptivity proper. Because in this stage, spiritual receptivity involves listening to something which is beyond what we currently are and beyond what we currently know. And you could say it's tuning into the great mystery of shunyata. And we have talked about shunyata quite a lot in this series. So about it being the essential emptiness of ourselves and all things. And we've also suggested at times that shunyata, that emptiness, might not be the best translation of shunyata, because it sounds, well, just a bit too empty, actually. So shunyata, well, we are empty of fixed selves, but to the extent that we're in touch with this in a positive way, it doesn't feel empty in the sense of being a blankness or an absence. I think, in my own experience, the closer I am to being in touch with shunyata, the fuller, the richer, the more beautiful and vibrant my life feels, the more kind of connected my relationships feel. The fuller things start to feel. I feel most connected and I feel like I'm vibrating with things. And there's an echo, I feel an echo of the infinite potential there in all of that connectedness. And I'm able to see and hear the beauty, which more correctly sums up what's going on, what reality is, I suppose. And one of my favourite quotes of the whole Pali Canon is that once somebody accused the Buddha of saying that when you got insight, you saw everything in the world as ugly. You started to see everything in the world as ugly because you see it how it really is. And he said, no, that's not what I say at all. And he said, when you reach up to the liberation called the beautiful, and having reached it abide therein, then you know indeed what beauty really is. Then you know indeed what beauty really is. So So the Buddha's telling us that the more truly, the more really we see reality, the more beautiful it becomes to us, the more beautiful it seems. And we really see this beauty. We might sense this ourselves when we hear some Dharma, or when we're doing a puja, or when we're in contact with something which is beyond us, and it's like we kind of come alive, it's like someone switched us on, and we kind of vibrate with that truth, we recognise that truth. And that's what Shraddha is really, that's what faith is. It's this resonance, this vibration with this truth that we're recognising from within ourselves. So this is the receptivity that we need at this stage of the path. It's noticing when this is happening to us, what plugs us in, and making sure that we're doing whatever it is that plugs us into this sense of what's beyond us. And for a lot of us, that might be in relation to any Buddhas and Bodhisattva figures that we have a connection with. So just like some of us might find that kind of quite straightforward, but for some of us, the whole area of Buddha and Bodhisattva figures might seem a bit strange or confusing. But I just really recommend that if we do have any sort of connection with any Buddha or Bodhisattva figure, however weird or confusing that might seem, to take that really seriously, because that is something in us resonating with something which is beyond us, even if we don't understand what exactly is going on there. And ultimately, what we're trying to hear beyond ourselves is the call of the thing that animates all of this, which is beyond us. It breathes life into the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, that draws us all on, something beyond us that's drawing us all on in our Dharma lives. And there's loads of different names for this force, if you like. And it's got the names the Bodhicitta, the Dharma Niyama, the Suprapersonal Force. So all these different names, trying to describe that there's that feeling that we might have, that I know that I feel sometimes, that what I'm doing isn't really a choice. It's not really a choice anymore. Like I know I've kind of come, I've heard the Dharma, and now there's something pulling me on. Even if there are some selves at the back going, oh, do we have to go to Sangha night? I come anyway because I have to. Like there's something pulling me towards that greater beauty, and I don't have a choice about it. And maybe you'll have experienced that to a greater or lesser extent yourself. Even when the ones down there are trying to stage a mutiny. And there's a poem by Bhante Sangharashtra that I think really sums up this kind of spirit, whatever it is that's animating our spiritual lives. It's called The Wind, so I'll read this poem. It's very beautiful. So, The Wind. A wind was in my sails. It blew stronger and fiercer hour by hour. I did not know from whence it came or why. I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks. Sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy. Sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still now I am old. It lives in me. Its breath my breath. Its will my will. So I just love that. It really kind of evokes it. For him, he doesn't really feel like he's doing it. There's something doing it. It's through him. And I definitely have a taste of that every now and then. You could say the culmination of all of our practice is to develop a receptivity and an openness to this wind, to allow this wind to blow through us and to blow us onwards to something else, be driven forwards. And you could also see all of the effort that we ever make in our Dharma lives. It's simply to create the conditions so that this can arise, so that this wind can blow through us. And again, there's this play of receptivity and action, because what the wind blows us towards is the compassionate, spontaneous activity of the Bodhisattva, who builds the Buddha land, well, just for the sheer joy of it, and also to benefit all of the beings who are going to dwell in it and who are going to grow. So I say, let's do it, and let's let the wind blow through us, let's build the Buddha land, just for the sheer joy of it, and also just to benefit ourselves and all the other beings who are going to dwell here. Thank you.